In this video, we will be looking at the May-June 2023 Edexcel Foundation Paper 3, which is a calculator paper. Question 1. Write the number 3107 in figures. So we know that in the thousand place we will have 3. We have 100, so we will have 1 in the hundreds place. We don't have anything in the tens place, and therefore we will just have a 7 in the ones place, and this question was worth 1 mark. Number 2, write 3/10 as a percentage. So in order to make a fraction into a percentage, we need to make it out of 100. And in order to make 10 into 100, we've multiplied by 10. Therefore, we will also multiply the 3 by 10, and that will make it 30%. And this is also worth 1 mark. Question 3, simplify m plus m plus m plus m. So because we are adding 4 m's to each other, this just becomes 4m. And this is worth 1 mark. Question 4, change 400 grams into kilograms. So in order to change grams into kilograms, we would have to divide by 1,000. And therefore, if we do 4,000 divided by 1,000, that just gives 4 kilograms. Question 5, 7, -5, 3, 9, -2. Write these numbers in order of size. Start with the smallest number. So we know that on the number line, if we have 0 to the left, even though the negative number digits are getting bigger, the value of these gets smaller. And to the right, the digits and the values are both getting bigger. Therefore, the smallest number will be one of the negative numbers. And we look at the one with the biggest digit, which is 5, which means -5 has the smallest value, followed by -2, and then the positive numbers, which are 3, 7, and 9. And ordering this in the correct order would have given 1 mark. Question 6. The diagram shows a shape on a centimeter grid. Part A, find the area. So we know that in order to find the area, we just have to count the boxes inside the shape. So this would be 1, this would be 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, and 14. And therefore we can say that the area of the shape is 14 centimeters squared. The next part says find the perimeter of the shape. So for the perimeter, we count the whole length around the shape. So this length here is 2. We then add this length here, which is 4, which gives us 6. If we add 1, that gives us 7. We then have another 2 boxes, which gives us 9. We have another 3 boxes, which gives us 12. And this longest length is 6. So if we add the 6 onto the 12, that gives us 18 centimeters. And each of these questions was worth 1 mark. Question 7. Here's a 4-sided spinner. Samina spins the spinner once. Part A, choose the word that best describes the probability that the spinner lands on 2. So as we can see, half of the spinner is labeled 2, and therefore the probability is a half, or in words, we can say evens. Part B, choose the word that best describes the probability that the spinner lands on a number less than 4. So on the spinner, we can see that all the numbers are less than 4, and therefore for this, we can say certain. The next part says Rolf rolls a biased dice once. The probability that he gets the number 5 is 0.4. Work out the probability that Rolf does not get the number 5. So we know that all the probabilities should add up to 1. Therefore, if the probability of getting a number 5 is 0.4, that means the probability of not getting 5 will be 1, take away 0.4, and this gives us 0.6. And all the parts in this question were worth 1 mark for the correct answer. Question 8. A quadrilateral has 4 right angles and 4 sides of equal length. Part A, write down the mathematical name of this quadrilateral. So the quadrilaterals that have 4 right angles are squares and rectangles. However, because this is asking for the one with 4 equal lengths, therefore that will be a square, because a rectangle has only 2 pairs of equal length. The next part says the diagram shows a solid shape. Write down the mathematical name of this shape, and for this we can say cuboid. Each of these parts were worth 1 mark each. Question 9. The table shows the number of books read by 4 people in 1 month. Part A, work out the median number of books. So to find the median, we would first have to order these numbers from lowest to highest. So we can first put 1, 5, 7, and 9. The median is the middle number, but here we've got 2 numbers in the middle, which are 5 and 7, which means to find the median, we would have to look for the middle number of 5 and 7, which would be 6. Part B says find the range. So to find the range, we do the highest number, which is 9, take away the lowest number, which is 1, and that gives us 8. Part C, on the grid, draw a bar chart to show the information in the table. So the first thing is that on the y-axis, we will put in the number of books, and on the x-axis, we will label each bar to show which person it corresponds to. The first person is Ximena, and she has read 7 books, so we can draw a bar going up to 7 and label it Ximena. The next bar is for Martha, and she read 9 books, so we can put a bar going up to 9 and label it Martha. The next bar is for Kezia, which is 1, so we just do a bar going up to 1 and also label it Kezia. The last bar is for Tabby, and she read 5 books, so we can do a bar going up to 5 and label that Tabby. So part A was a 2-mark question. We would get the first mark for ordering the numbers and the second mark for getting the correct median. Part B was a 1-mark question, and we would get a mark for a correct answer of 8. Part C was a 3-mark question, so we would get the first mark for correctly labeling the y-axis as the number of books. 1 mark would be awarded if only 2 of these bars were correct, but if all 4 bars were correct, then 2 marks would be awarded for the correct bars. Question 10. Wayne begins walking at 8:30 a.m. He walks for 1 hour and 45 minutes. Wayne then rests for 15 minutes. He then walks for 85 minutes to a cafe. Does Wayne get to the cafe before 12 noon? You must show how you get your answer. So first in this question, we are told that Wayne walks for 1 hour and 45 minutes, and then he rests for 15 minutes. If we add these 2 times, that gives us 2 hours. We're then told he walks for 85 minutes, and if we partition the 85 minutes into hours and minutes, we will see that this gives us 60 minutes, which is 1 full hour. And if we want to see how many minutes we can partition this to, we can just do 85 take away 60, and that gives us 25 minutes. So we've partitioned it into 60 minutes and 25 minutes so that we can have a full hour and 25 minutes. This means that Wayne spent 2 hours, 1 hour, and 25 minutes before he reached the cafe, which totals to 3 hours and 25 minutes. So if we add this time onto the 8:30 a.m., we can first add the 3 hours, which takes the time to 11:30 a.m. And if we then add the 25 minutes onto 11:30, that gives 11:55 a.m. And therefore, to answer this question, we can say yes, because Wayne gets to the cafe at 11:55 a.m., which is before 12 noon. This was a 4-mark question. The first mark would be given for correctly adding the times. The second mark for recognizing that 85 minutes can be partitioned into a whole hour and 25 minutes. A third mark for adding the times on correctly and getting 11:55 as the time of arrival to the cafe. And a final mark for stating that he does get to the cafe before 12 noon. Question 11. Gabriel thinks of a number. He multiplies his number by 5 and then adds 7. His answer is 72. What number did Gabriel think of? So we know that Gabriel thinks of a number and then multiplies it by 5 and then adds 7 to get an answer of 72. So in order to find the number that he began with, we just have to work backwards and do the inverse of each operation that he did. So we can first do 72 take away 7, which gives us 65. And then we can divide by 5, and 65 divided by 5 gives 13. So the number that he began with is 13. This was a 3-mark question. The first mark would be given for minusing 7, the second mark for dividing by 5, and the third mark for a correct final answer of 13. Question 12. Some students took a guitar exam. The pie chart shows information about the grades the students got. Part A, write down the modal grade. The modal grade simply means the grade which the majority of the students got, meaning the one that appeared the most, and for that we can see that 150 degrees is the biggest angle, which represents merit, and therefore the modal grade would be merit. The next part says, 7 students got distinction. Work out the total number of students who took the guitar exam. So from the pie chart, we can see that 105 degrees represents 7 students. The total number of degrees in a pie chart is 360, and therefore to find the total number of students, we would just use proportion to see what 360 degrees represents. So in order to do that, we first need to see what we did to 105 to make it 360. So we can just do 360 divided by 105, and that gives 24 over 7, which means that 105 has been multiplied by 24 over 7 to get 360. And therefore we will do the same on this side to 7. So if we do 7 times 24 over 7, that just gives 24 students. So the total number of students were 24. This was a 3-mark question, and the first mark would be given for recognizing that 105 degrees has been multiplied by 24 over 7. A second mark for multiplying 7 by 24 over 7. And a third mark for a correct final answer of 24. Part A was also worth 1 mark for a correct answer of merit. Question 13. Rowena drove from her home to a beach. Here is the travel graph for her journey. Rowena stopped at a cafe on her way to the beach. Part A1. How many minutes did Rowena take to drive to the cafe? So if we look at the travel graph, we can see that Rowena left her house at 12 o'clock, drove to the cafe, waited at the cafe, and then drove to the beach. So to find how many minutes Rowena took to drive to the cafe, we will look at the first segment of this line, and this is the time where she reaches the cafe. And we can see that this is in the middle of 12 o'clock and 13 o'clock, and therefore this time is 12:30. Therefore, she left at 12 o'clock, reached the cafe at 12:30, which means she took 30 minutes to drive to the cafe. Part 2 says write down the distance from Rowena's home to the cafe. So again, we're looking at her journey from home to cafe, which is the same first line segment, and the distance can be found in the y-axis, which will be 10 miles. The next part of the question says, Rowena stayed at the beach for 1.5 hours. She then drove home without stopping. Rowena arrived home at 16 o'clock. Part B, on the grid, complete the travel graph. So the question says Rowena stayed at the beach for 1.5 hours. And we can see that she reached the beach at this time here. And again, that's in the middle of 13 o'clock and 14 o'clock. So that is 13:30. If she stayed for 1.5 hours, if we add 1 hour, that first takes the time to 14:30. And if we add the half hour on, it takes the time to 15 o'clock. Therefore, she stayed at the beach up to 15 o'clock. She then drives home without stopping and reaches at 16 o'clock. So from 15 o'clock, we will just draw a line down to 16 o'clock to show her journey back home without stopping. Part C says, work out the average speed for the journey from the beach to Rowena's house. So from the graph, we can see that the distance that she drove from the beach to her house is 35 miles. And she drove this distance between 15 o'clock and 16 o'clock, which is 1 hour. We know that speed just means the distance divided by time, and this distance that she drove was 35 miles in 1 hour, which means that her speed was therefore 35 miles per hour. For part A, each of these parts were 1 mark. For part B, where we needed to complete the travel graph, we would get 1 mark each for drawing the correct line segments, and for part C, we would get 1 mark for a correct speed of 35 miles per hour. Question 14. 120 boxes cost £6. 270 bags cost £10. A bag is cheaper than a box. How much cheaper? Give your answer in pence, correct to 1 decimal place. So in order to do this, we would first have to find the unit prices of the bags and the box, meaning how much it would cost to buy 1 box and 1 bag. So we can use the information 120 boxes cost £6. So if 120 boxes cost £6, in order to find how much 1 box would be, we have divided 120 by itself to get 1. So we will also do 6 divided by 120, and that gives £0.05, which is the same as 5p. If 270 bags cost £10, then in order to find 1 bag, we have divided 270 by itself to get 1. So we will do 10 divided by 270, and that gives £0.037, which is the same as 3.7p. The question is asking us to find how much cheaper the bag is. So in order to do that, we will do 5, take away 3.7, and this gives 1.3 pence. This was a 4-mark question, and we'd get the first mark for finding the price of 1 box, the second mark for finding the price of 1 bag, a third mark for correctly finding the difference between the two by taking away, and a final mark for a correct final answer of 1.3 pence. Question 15. There are only red beads and green beads in a bag. Number of red beads to number of green beads is equal to 1 to 4. There are 35 red beads in the bag. Work out the total number of beads in the bag. So for this question, we can write down the ratio of red to green, which is 1 part to 4 parts. And we are told that the red beads are 35. The question is then asking to work out the total number of beads in the bag, and we can see that the total parts are 5. Therefore, to work out the total parts, we would just do 35 multiplied by 5, and that gives 175. This is a 2-mark question. The first mark would be awarded for recognizing that we would have to multiply by 5, and the second mark for a correct final answer of 175. Question 17. The diagram shows the position of town T. Town R is 55 kilometers from town T on a bearing of 65 degrees. Mark the position of town R with a cross. Use a scale of 1 centimeter to 10 kilometers. So for this question, we have been given a scale of 1 centimeter to 10 kilometers. So we have been given a scale here, and we've also been told that town R is 55 kilometers. So in order to find what that represents for the drawing, we would have to use the scale 1 centimeter equal to 10 kilometer. And to find out what 55 kilometers is, we would have to check what we did to 10 to make it 55. So if we do 55 divided by 10, that gives us 5.5, which means we've multiplied 10 by 5.5. And if we do the same to the 1, that means this is 5.5 centimeters on the drawing. So for this question, we would first have to use the protractor to measure a bearing of 65 degrees. And to measure a bearing, we always move in the clockwise direction. So we would place the protractor at this point and use the scale from 0 here until we get to 65, which is there. We can then use a ruler to draw a line such that it is 5.5 centimeters long and we can now mark this point with a cross and call it R. Question 16. Describe fully the single transformation that maps shape A onto shape B. So first we can find the corresponding lengths in shape A and shape B. And this length in shape A, which is going vertically down, is this length in shape B, which is going across to the right. And as we can see, this has moved anti-clockwise and 90 degrees, and therefore we can say that this is a rotation 90 degrees anti-clockwise. And the other piece of information that we need to give is the center of rotation, meaning which point it is being rotated about, and that would be the point 0, 0, because that is the 90-degree point around which it has been rotated. So we can write with center of rotation 0, 0. This was a 2-mark question, and the first mark would be given for stating that it is a rotation with the correct direction, and the second mark for stating the center of rotation. Question 18. Solve 4 brackets 2x minus 3 is equal to 20. So in order to do this, we would first have to expand the bracket. So 4 times 2x gives 8x. And 4 multiplied by negative 3 gives negative 12, and this is equal to 20. We would now collect all the number terms on the right-hand side. So if we add 12 onto both sides, it would give 8x is equal to 32. And in order to find x, we would have to divide both sides by 8. And if we do 32 divided by 8, that gives 4, and therefore x is equal to 4. This is a 3-mark question. The first mark would be awarded for correctly expanding the brackets, the second mark for collecting the number terms, and the third mark for dividing by 8 and getting a correct answer of x is equal to 4. Question 19. Jenny invests £3,000 for 6 years at Y% simple interest per year. At the end of the 6 years, Jenny has received a total of £450 in interest. Work out the value of Y. So if Jenny has received £450 after 6 years, that means we can first find how much interest she received in 1 year, and in order to do that, we will do 450 divided by 6, and this gives £75. So in 1 year, if she's receiving £75 in simple interest, this means that the Y% of interest that she was getting of the amount, which is £3,000, should give £75. So in order to look for this, we can first write Y% as a fraction, which would be Y over 100 of 3,000, meaning we would multiply it by 3,000, and this would be equal to 75. We can now cancel the common zeros in the numerator and denominator on the left-hand side. So we have 2 common zeros in the 100 and 3,000. And we therefore have y times 30 is equal to 75. So to make y on its own, we would have to divide by 30. So y would be equal to 75 divided by 30. And this gives 2.5, which means that the simple interest she was receiving was 2.5%. This was a 3-mark question. The first mark would be given for recognizing how much she gets in simple interest per year. The second mark for correctly using a method to find y using simple interest, and a third mark for a correct final answer of 2.5. Question 20. Part A, simplify m squared to the power 3. So whenever we have a power outside brackets, we have to multiply the powers. So if we do 2 multiplied by 3, that gives 6. So the answer will be m to the power 6. Part B, simplify x to the power 5 times x to the power 8. And whenever we're multiplying numbers with indices, we have to add the powers. And so if we add 5 and 8, that gives x to the power 13. Part C says expand 4p brackets p squared plus 3p. So first, if we do 4p times p squared, that gives 4p cubed. And if we multiply 4 and 3, that gives 12. And p multiplied by p gives p squared. Therefore, the answer is 4p cubed plus 12p squared. Part A was a 1-mark question. Part B was a 1-mark question. And for Part C, we would get 1 mark if we expanded correctly any one of these two terms, and a second mark if we correctly expanded both of these terms. Question 21. Johnny wants to know how much coffee he will need for 800 people at a meeting. Each person who drinks coffee will drink 2 cups of coffee. 10.6 grams of coffee is needed for each cup of coffee. Johnny assumes 68% of the people will drink coffee. Part A. Using this assumption, work out the amount of coffee Johnny will need. Give your answer correct to the nearest gram. So first, we are told that only 68% of the 800 people will be drinking coffee. So first, we can find 68% of the 800 people, and we can put this in the calculator as 68 over 100 and multiplied by 800, and that gives 544, which means only 544 people will be drinking coffee. We're then told that for each person who drinks coffee, they will be drinking 2 cups, and each cup contains 10.6 grams of coffee. Therefore, to find how much coffee is needed per person, we would do 2 multiplied by the 10.6 grams, and that gives 21.2 grams. And if that's the coffee that's needed for one person, for 544 people, we would need 544 multiplied by the 21.2, and that gives 11,532.8 grams. And because the question is asking to give the answer to the nearest gram, we can just round this off to 11,533. The next part of the question says, Johnny's assumption is wrong. 72% of the people will drink coffee. Part B, how does this affect your answer to part A? So if more people are drinking coffee, that simply means that he will need more coffee. Part A was a 4-mark question. The first mark would be given for finding out that 544 people drink coffee. The second mark for finding how much coffee is needed per person. The third mark for finding the total grams of coffee needed. And the fourth mark for correctly rounding it and getting a final answer of 11,533. And part B was a 1-mark question for saying that he would need more coffee. Question 22. ACF and ADG are straight lines. BCD and EFG are parallel lines. Show that triangle ACD is isosceles. Give a reason for each stage of your working. So the first thing we can do is we can see that ADG is a straight line. Therefore, to find angle ADC, we can do 180 take away 110, which gives 70 degrees. And the reason we did that was because we know that angles on a straight line add up to 180. And therefore, we can label the 70 degrees on the diagram as well. We can then see that BC and EF are parallel, and because we have this line cutting through them, we can see that BCA is also going to be 125 degrees because it is a corresponding angle with EFC. We can label that onto the diagram as well. And we can then see that angle DCA can be found by doing 180 take away 125, because that is also a straight line, and that gives 55 degrees. And the reason that we can give for taking away from 180 is also that angles on a straight line add up to 180. We can also label that onto the diagram, and as we can see that ACD is a triangle, and we know that angles in a triangle add up to 180. So to find angle CAD, we can simply take away from 180 the sum of the 55 and 70 degrees. And if we work that out, that gives us 55 degrees. And the reason we took this away from 180 was because angles in a triangle add up to 180. So as we can see, we have two angles which are 55 in triangle ACD. We have angle CAD, which is 55, and also angle ACD, which is 55. And because we have two angles which are equal, we can therefore say that this triangle is therefore an isosceles triangle. This was a 5-mark question, and in this question, we would get 1 mark for each step of working out with a correct reason. Question 23. It takes 14 hours for 5 identical pumps to fill a water tank. How many hours would it take 4 of these pumps to fill another water tank of the same size? So first, because it is taking 14 hours for 5 identical pumps, to find out the total hours that would be needed, we can simply do 14 multiplied by 5, and that gives 70 hours. Therefore, if 5 pumps are taking 70 hours, in order to find out how many 4 of these pumps would take, we can simply do 70 divided by 4, and that gives 17.5 hours. This was a 2-mark question, and we would get the first mark for multiplying by 5 and the second mark for dividing by 4 and getting a final answer of 17.5. Question 24. A and B are numbers such that A is equal to 2 squared times 3 to the power 4 times 7, and B is equal to 3 squared times 7 squared. Part A, find the highest common factor of A and B. So in order to do this, we can use a Venn diagram and do 2 circles, one which represents A and the second which represents B. In the middle, we can put all the factors which are common in both A and B. So first, for A, we've got 2 squared. However, there's no 2's in B, so we will just put 2 2's in A. We then have 3 to the power 4 in A, which means A has 4 3's and B has 2 of them. Therefore, we can put 2 in the middle and another 2 just in A. We then have 7 for A and 7 squared for B, which means one of them is common for both, so we can put 1 7 in the middle and the other 7 just for B. The highest common factor is therefore given by all the factors that they share, which is 3, 3, and 7. So if we multiply that, that gives us 63. Part B, find the lowest common multiple, LCM, of A and B. So to find the lowest common multiple, we would have to multiply all the numbers in this Venn diagram. We already know that the numbers in the middle make 63, and we can now just multiply by all the numbers which are in A, which is 2, 2, 3, and 3, and the number which is in just B, which is 7. And if we work that out, that gives an answer of 15,876. So part A was a 1-mark question, and we would have got the 1 mark for getting a correct final answer of 63. Part B was a 2-mark question, and we would get 1 mark for correctly knowing the method of multiplying all the factors in the Venn diagram, and a 2nd mark for getting a correct final answer of 15,876. Question 25. Lava flows from a volcano at a constant rate of 11.9 meter cubed per second. How many days does it take for 67,205,600 meter cubed of lava to flow from the volcano? Give your answer correct to the nearest day. So we are told that 11.9 meter cubed takes 1 second, and if we need to find how many seconds 67,205,600 meter cubed will take, we can check what we did to 11.9 to do this. So we can do this number divided by 11.9, and this gives us 5,647,529, which means we have multiplied the 11.9 by this, and therefore if we do the same to the 1, this means that this will take 5,647,529 seconds. Because the question is asking us for the time to the nearest day, we would first have to convert this to hours, and we know that 1 hour has 3,600 seconds. Therefore, to convert this into hours, we would first have to divide this by 3,600, and if we work that out, that gives us 1,568.75 hours. We now know that 1 day has 24 hours. Therefore, in order to find how many days these many hours would be, we would divide this number by 24, and that would give us 65.36 days. And because the question is asking for the answer to the nearest day, we will just give the answer as 65 days. This is a 3-mark question, and we would first get 1 mark for finding the correct amount of time it takes in seconds, the 2nd mark for being able to convert this time into hours, and the 3rd mark for being able to correct it into days and correctly rounding it to 65 days. Question 26. Here's the graph of y is equal to x squared minus 2x minus 2. Part A, write down the coordinates of the turning point of the graph of y is equal to x squared minus 2x minus 2. So we know that the turning point is this minimum point here, and the coordinates of that point are 1, negative 3. Part B, write down an estimate for one of the roots of x squared minus 2x minus 2 is equal to 0. So the roots are the points at which the graph intersects the x-axis, and these are the points that it intersects the x-axis at. And those points, when read carefully from the graph, are negative 0.7 and 2.7. However, because the question is only asking for one of the roots, we can pick any one of these and we would get 1 mark for writing any one of these correctly. Part A was also a 1-mark question, and Part B was a 1-mark question in which you would have got the mark for any correct root from both of these. Question 27. A solid cuboid is made of metal. The metal has a density of 9 grams per centimeter cubed. The volume of the cuboid is 72 centimeter cubed. Work out the mass of the cuboid. So we know that density is given by mass divided by volume, and therefore if we want to use this formula to find mass, we would have to do density multiplied by volume. The density of this cuboid is 9 grams per centimeter cubed, and the volume is 72 centimeter cubed. And if we multiply this gives an answer of 648 grams. This was a 2-mark question. The 1st mark would have been given for correctly using the formula for density and multiplying 9 by 72, and the 2nd mark for getting a correct final answer of 648. Question 28. Part A, write 9 times 10 to the power 4 to 4.5 times 10 to the power 6 in the form 1 to n, where n is an integer. So in order to write this in the form 1 is to n, that means we would have to divide 9 times 10 to the power 4 by itself. And if we do that to one side of a ratio, we would have to do the same thing to the second number in the ratio. So on the calculator, we can work this out by doing 4.5 times 10 to the power 6 divided by 9 times 10 to the power 4. And this gives us an answer of 50. So in the form 1 to n, this ratio would be 1 to 50, where n is equal to 50. Part B, write the following numbers in order of size. Start with the smallest. So first, as we can see, some of these numbers are ordinary and the rest are given in standard form, and therefore we would have to first make all of these ordinary numbers in order to compare them correctly. So the first number is 5.625 times 10 to the power 4, which means that we would have to move the decimal to the right 4 times, which takes the decimal there. And if we put a placeholder there, this number now becomes 56,250. The second number is 5,625, and it is already given as an ordinary number. The third number is 56,250 times 10 to the power negative 3, which means that when we have a power negative 3, the decimal would have to move 3 steps to the left, which means the decimal would now be between the 6 and the 2, which would make this number 56.250. For the last number, this number is multiplied by 10 to the power 5, and therefore we would move the decimal 5 times to the right, which brings the decimal between the 2 and the 5, making this number 562.5. Because these are now all ordinary numbers, we can check for the smallest number, and the smallest number would be the 56.25. And when answering the question, we would write the number as it has been given in the original form that it has been given in the question. So we would write this as 56,250 times 10 to the power negative 3. The number that is followed by that would be the number in the hundreds place, which is the 562.5, which is given as 0.005625 times 10 to the power 5. The next number would be the 5,625. And the final number, which is the largest, is the 56,250, which has been given as 5.625 times 10 to the power 4. So part A was a 2-mark question. 1 mark would be awarded for knowing that we would need to divide both of these numbers by 9 times 10 to the power 4 to get it in the form 1 to n. And the second mark for a correct final answer of 50 as n. And for part B, 2 marks would be given for correctly ordering all of these numbers.